Like, how are how is there so much silence around this? Like, how dare you be silent? And I walked in and there were so many girls there. And I was just completely shocked. And I was also like justified in a way, but also just so saddened. I was like, I can't believe this has happened to this many girls. It was kind of like a question of who abused you. And then Rick came in at the very end of it. This is wrong. Like, this is blatantly wrong, and everyone will believe that it's wrong. But I was like, how can you think that this is okay? He like leaned down, and this is a massive guy. Bends down and he says, let me put it this way. If you don't marry him, we're going to fire him. And if we fire him, it's going to be your fault.
Hey guys, so as I mentioned in my last video, one of my wife's friends from her school at Morningstar University is going to be coming forward today with her story. So since this is my wife's friend, she's going to give a short introduction for Leah.
Hey guys, my friend Leah is going to be sharing with us today. We were friends and students together at Morningstar University, and she's going to be telling her story and experience with abusive and predatory leadership. She will also share with us how leadership responded to her and multiple others coming forward after being violated. I was witness to some of this manipulation and breakdown in leadership while at school, but many of these things and experiences I will be hearing with you guys as well today. She will be speaking to her direct experience at Morningstar with SA, harassment, and cover-up from leadership. I also hope we can all carry a posture of respect and gratitude today for Leah coming forward. She is coming to us from Italy and from a beautiful town. She's been just doing life there, raising her beautiful family, and honestly, Morningstar and her bad experiences there really weren't on her radar. Leah is an amazing woman, and it can be a lot coming forward with these kinds of things, not just because of the accusations that you receive, like being called wolves and flies and full of bitterness from people like Rick Joyner, but also just going back into that negative and often traumatic experience that you had to shed light on pervasive problems within the church world. So with all that said, let's go ahead and hear from Leah. Hey, Leah.
Hey Leah, good to see you.
Hi, guys. Good to see you too.
Thank you. Thank you for joining in with us today and for your time and just for being willing to share your story. I know it's a big deal to share something, traumatic that happened to you before a public audience. So I just want to say thank you for coming forward and for giving us your time today.
Definitely.
Yeah. Leah, I know I wanted to share this before we get started. I know for me, when I read this lawsuit about what happened to these young boys, I was like, wait a minute, this stuff's still happening? Like this was happening when we were there, however, 14 years ago. And, being a mom now, I know we talked and realized our boys are literally the same age. And so I think it, really affected us and made us want to just speak up to the issues that we knew happened back then. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with everyone what's motivated you to come share your story now.
I mean, it was something I was definitely considering doing. I was speaking to a couple of friends about their experiences at Morningstar when we were there, including you from our class, and just the stories. Everyone had something, a different kind of abuse to share. And then I had a lot of information that I think a lot of people did not know. And I was quite shocked when I realized that so much of that was hidden even after I left. Because I think after we left, we separated, and that part of my life was kind of closed off, and, I got healing, and, I really was able to just be okay with everything that happened. And then kind of hearing it again and hearing that this abuse was still continuing. And I had been very quiet about it, about my personal experiences. But then No, sorry. Enough's enough. I'm done with hiding something. I don't think we should have to hide abuse. I think we should be able to speak about it and be open about it. And especially if it's going to bring healing to other people or allow people to feel like they can actually open up about their personal experiences as well. So I do feel like it's important to share. I really do. So
Yeah,
that's what.
absolutely. And I think that that's part of like why we want to bring this out, is because we're realizing that this wasn't just a problem in our time, but it's part of the culture at Morningstar, that when things like this happen, you're told just to be quiet about it. You're told to cover it up, and that you're actually made to feel like you're sinning if you talk about it and bring it out in the open. And I think,
Yeah.
like you mentioned in our conversation, like we're all grown up now and we realize like that's not right. We're not supposed to do that. But we
Yeah.
moved on with our lives, kind of put that aside. But now that this has come back in the light, we're like, okay, it's time to talk about it. It's time to talk about it now. And I just want to preface for people, will not be speaking to what happened with the 3 young boys who are currently in the lawsuit against Morningstar, because we weren't there during that time. What we will be
Hmm.
speaking to is what happened during our time at school in, I forgot to, Leah, tell people what years you were there at Morningstar.
Yeah, we were there in 2000, I guess 2008 until 2011-ish time. Because we were
Yeah.
always at the conferences and stuff. We were definitely a part of even the Fort Mill church
hmm
beforehand.
And I think we started school in the fall of 2009 as just like official, like
Mhm.
university students. But you're right, we were going down to conferences and things
Mhm.
before that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I just wanted to give that preface that we'll be speaking to the part of the lawsuit that is putting forth that Morningstar has a history of covering up abuse. And we want to share our experience with that, and that we feel that's a true statement. So Leah, tell me about what brought you to Morningstar University and when you were there.
Um, I was just at a point in my life where I wasn't quite sure which direction I wanted to go, but I did want to really elevate my knowledge of God, and studying the Bible was something I was doing regularly anyway, but it was more so for the spiritual experiences, because I'm quite spiritual, and it was really something that I was very excited about experiencing, and just kind of elevating my spiritual vision, I guess, because I'm a seer. And so knowing that Rick was also a seer and I read his books and everything, I was really excited to go and be around like-minded people. So that's really what brought me there.
Okay. Yeah. And I think I would add to that, when you mentioned the books, I would say probably a lot of us maybe were drawn to Morningstar through reading Rick Joyner's books, right? I think a lot of us
Yeah.
either read one of his books or went to a conference or something.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I've ever asked you, like, verbatim, like, what drew you to Morningstar? I'd
No,
like to
that's
hear
the
your
first time you've
answer.
ever asked me as well. I've
Yeah.
actually never
Well,
been asked.
um, well, we were going to the Morningstar in Winston, that's where we met. And that's when I found out that they had a school of ministry at this church in Charlotte.
Hmm.
And I don't know, remember they have people come down and they
Hmm.
do certain church services, and it'd be people our age or a little bit older than us. And they just seemed like they're like so on fire, and they're
Hmm.
prophesying, and they're, moving in the supernatural, seemingly, like powerful way. And it's like, oh, I can go to a school and learn how to do that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's part of what you're going to a place that you feel like there's supposed to be leaders there who have already attained this
Hmm.
wisdom and this growth um, in this
Maturity,
in
yeah.
maturity in as being followers of Christ and knowing the scriptures and walking in the gifts of the Spirit. So you're like, I should go and study under these people and learn from them. I'd say that's
Exactly.
probably what drew me there, and maybe a lot of us. So Leah, while we were students there, did you experience any harassment or abuse from leadership?
I definitely did. During my first year, it was pretty intense. And I didn't really know how to navigate it in that moment. But I definitely did. It happened shortly after we started school, and we kept, like, I noticed, and I think you noticed as well, like we kept getting kind of put in these little cliques. And I just noticed a pattern in this, in the university, of leadership wanting to kind of segregate groups of people. I definitely felt like I was being pulled away from my friends and being put in these little cliques. And so there was a clique that I was in, which ended up becoming us going on a ministry trip. And there was, two other girls. One was, a third year, and the other one was in my class. And the other two were good friends, but I noticed that me and this one other beautiful girl were definitely being kind of brought into the office, and we were having a lot of like extra meetings, and we were being brought coffee every morning, and being sent a lot of text messages. And I knew that she was getting the same sort of experience that I was getting. And so I was able to ask her about it and be like, what is this? She was like, this is very inappropriate behavior, especially for a married man with 2 kids. And I was like, absolutely. So that was really the most that we spoke about it. But then I had mentioned certain things to leaders and been like, is this appropriate? Whatever. And they've definitely brushed it off. And then it got to the point where I was getting text messages that were so incredibly inappropriate, that there was no way to justify it, I felt. So, and obviously I knew that with a text message, you could bring that to leadership, but you very much had to be careful about what leader you brought it to. Because think about it, like if everyone really is in these little cliques, leadership was also in these cliques. So it was, you might share this information with the wrong person. I think we were all very aware of that. You knew what leaders you could and couldn't trust with information, especially delicate information. We didn't have very many strong female leaders. Also, I noticed in our year, and so I ended up kind of speaking to one of the girls in the 3rd year who was she was in my small group, and I think she was my small group leader. You were in the same group, but I just felt like I could open up to her about it. So I ended up sharing with her.
So was this like a pastor? Was this an MSU leader?
This was, so shortly after we started school, Steve Thompson, I believe, was let go, and Stephen Alls took his place. And so he became the head of MSU, and it was from him.
Was it during the time that he was an actual leader of the school, like
Yeah.
the MSU head of the school?
Yeah.
That he was doing
Yes.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, as you said, Steve Thompson, he was fired in our first trimester there. So during Christmas break, and Stephen Alls became the new head of the school after that, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. And I know you mentioned, just for other people to realize, so this was, he was married. He had a couple young children, I believe, and I'd say he was probably a good bit older than the rest of us
He
too.
was
I mean, we were like 19.
Yeah, we were 19, and he was, I believe, 30, 34, 36. He was, he was in his mid to late 30s. Yeah, from what I can remember.
Yeah. And aside from the texting, was he trying to cross other physical boundaries, or was it mainly just inappropriate texting?
So it started with inappropriate texting, and obviously like trying to sit really close, and there were times when he would whisper in my ear, and kind of like have his arm around me, and then, whispering in your ear, and it's very close. Like, that's very intimate. I think they probably would have had a hard time with, a couple doing that at the church. much less a leader doing it with a student. So that was kind of strange. Okay, so he ended up being the head of this Denmark trip that we were going to be taking. And because of that, there were a lot of extra meetings in his office, or we went to Starbucks one time, and actually at Starbucks. And my friend actually witnessed this, which I'm really grateful for. So we're all sitting together in this booth, and he's sitting next to me, and he just has his hand on my inner thigh. And it was like, oh, is that an accident? But then I'm like trying to kind of pull my leg away, and he's just getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And it was just like very obvious. And then he just like grabs my thigh, and I like was just moving really too far up. And I was like, for one thing, I was in a relationship. And I was like, what is going on? And I was like, and we're in a public place surrounded by people, like surrounded by the other students as well. So I was like, this is very, just super uncomfortable. And I didn't know what to do or say. And obviously if I said something there, it would have, it would have caused me to get kicked off that Denmark trip, which I really wanted to go on. And then also he probably could have denied it very, very easily, no, I wasn't. What are you talking about? So I was very like, what in the world? And I was just trying to pull away. Thankfully, I saw it happen, which I'm so, so grateful for. And then later that night, so he was sending these very inappropriate text messages. And so I definitely, in one of them, he even said, like, I can't wait to get you alone. I think we should come up with a reason to play tackle football just so I can, tackle you into the grass and get to touch you all over your body and just things like this. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, okay. So I was thinking to myself, and he even said, like, I'm going to make sure I'm sitting next to you on the airplane. And I knew he was the head of this trip that was coming up. And I was terrified, to be honest, because I knew, I wanted to go on this trip. I'd never, been to Europe. I was very excited about it. And I knew that he was going to be the head of this trip. So he could definitely make it possible for us to be alone. And I did not want to cross those lines. I was in no way interested in him. So I was just terrified. And then I ended up sharing with, so she's a third year. And I ended up sharing with her just the text messages, and it was the day that he had touched my leg, and I was like, oh my God. I just knew I needed to try and put a stop to it if I could. And I didn't know how. I didn't know, but I did trust her. And I felt like if I told her, she would know who to take it to, because she's just such a great person and very trustworthy. And so I shared the information with her. I believe I sent screenshots to her as well. And I didn't hear a thing about it after that. So I ended up actually finding out, I think it was like a week or so later, Rick came into our class and just notified all of us that he had been let go. And I hadn't heard anything from anyone, there was no information given. So I gave that information, and then suddenly everything's silent. And then, and I had also shared that it had happened with another girl in our class, similar things. She had gotten really inappropriate text messages, and had some strange behaviors, but I'm not sure if she was physically touched.
You mentioned at the beginning, Leah, like that when we got to school, it felt like they kind of grouped people off and put us in these little cliques. And I wanted to just affirm that as well. Like that was my experience as a student as well, because you, me, and our other friend came down from the same hometown together as students. Mm-hmm. And it felt like leadership, especially the first few months we were in school when Steve Thompson was still there, it was obvious that there was like this favored group of students. They were like the older second year and third year students that were like his special crew. They were like anointed ones, right? Like they were the ones who had all the giftings and the ones that got like put on the stages to speak and be selected to go on trips, and it just was obvious they were shown special favoritism from the leaders. So we definitely saw that right away. And then they would do that in our class as well, you know. And I think with Stephen Alls, it seems he had a select group of girls that he wanted in his circle, right? And you ended up being one of those, and some of the other girls in our class. I wanted to add this too, Leah, for those listening in, because I know we talked about this when we talked on the phone and reconnected. A lot of us who have been watching this kind of stuff have known what's been happening with all these scandals that have been coming out in the church. Like for those who followed on this channel, we obviously spoke to a lot of the IHOP stuff. But when I reconnected with Leah, she has been living in Italy for the past, I think, 13 years. When we left school, graduated school at the same time. I realized when we were talking that you weren't aware, because you've been very much like apart from the Morningstar world and what's been going on in like the American church world. You've been living your own life in Italy and raising your kids and running your business. You know, so, and I think that's how it is for all of us now who were there at that time. All of us have moved on. We've not just been sitting around harping on our bad Morningstar experiences. You know, we've moved on with our life, but this brought that up afresh again, that, oh, hey, there's still like these same issues. We need to talk about it. But so when I was conveying to you some of the things that had happened with the whole IHOP and Mike Bickle situation, I was telling you how what you shared with me about Stephen Alls making those comments about getting you alone when you guys were on the Denmark trip. It reminded me so much of when the stories came out about Mike Bickle and, you know, the women. It was very, very similar patterns of behavior, like, you know, putting his hand on her thigh under the table, even in public settings. And I shared with you about the Paris trip, what happened to her there, you know. And I just wanted to share that because, you know, in our phone call, I know you were like, just kind of expressed like some shock that was kind of your fear, that you were worried that he's clearly going to try to get you alone, and you're going to be in another country and not really have anybody around you, especially you're right. He would have had that ability to make sure he was in a situation alone with you. And so I just wanted to share that for others to hear too, that when we talked about that with the Mike Bickle and Jane Doe situation, you related to that, and that was part of your fear in going on that trip with him.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. No, like I probably would have made it so that I wasn't going to go on that trip if I knew he was going, because of how terrified I was. I was in a relationship. He was married. He was significantly older than me. I was not in the least bit interested in his advances. So I was like, but I knew that it's just such a vulnerable place to be in another country. I mean, he essentially holds all of the power. He can even say, well, we're going to leave you here. I mean, you never know. I was 19. So you have to think about, like, from a very young person's perspective.
I'm guessing he would have been the main one with oversight on orchestrating the whole trip and how that goes, or were there other leaders around him at all?
Yeah, he chose who was a leader on the trip. He chose who was going on the trip. Yeah.
So he kind of the one-man rodeo show ran his own under
it became that way when Steve Thompson was let go. That did happen. Like, the church was in the middle of, I guess, trying to figure out who was going to be the leaders to step in and take his, you know, the position he had. And
he was already a leader. He was already a leader in the school, but he wasn't like the head of MSU. But after Steve Thompson was fired, he became like the head MSU pastor. You said, Leah, that this when the texting got to a point and then him crossing the physical threshold and you going to the third year student, that was right before the ministry trip was supposed to happen, right?
I think it was like a week before we were supposed to leave.
Okay. Yeah. And so did he end up going on that trip, or was he fired before that?
No, he was fired. So I just didn't, like I said, I didn't hear anything after I had given those text messages to the third year leader. And then suddenly Rick came into one of our classes and just kind of informed us that he was let go. And he didn't really say much about it. He just said there was some inappropriate situation that had taken place and that he was let go and that he was potentially going to step in instead of Stephen. I mean, that was days before our trip. Like, so, I mean, I was super worried that, you know, the trip would be canceled, because then it was like, okay, well, what leader is going to go? And then they ended up bringing in Brad McLennan to take his place, because he had come in and, I guess, spoken in some of our classes and stuff. So we already knew who he was.
So did you end up still going to Denmark?
Yeah, I went to Denmark and he was not there.
Leah, I know you said that after you took your concerns and what happened and Stephen crossing this threshold and these text messages, you took them to the third year student that you trusted, and then you didn't know what happened after that. She didn't kind of come back and tell you about that meeting with leadership or anything. You said Rick Joyner came in our class and said that the head of our school was fired, right?
Yeah.
After that, though, did leadership ever speak to you directly about this incident?
Okay, so they did, but let me also say, before we went on our Denmark trip, from what I have found out recently, is that there were secret meetings with our entire class that I was not invited to, where leadership, I guess, from what I've been told in this last like couple weeks, is that leadership actually told the entire student body that it was my fault, and or they said that they alluded to the fact that it was my fault and my issue and not the leader's issue. And so they actually ended up pulling that leader into the, I guess, the meeting class, whatever it was, and prayed for him and sent him off. And I remember like some strange, it just felt weird. And I remember all of the students being in this classroom that we're never usually in. And I wasn't told about it. And that I just knew something was up, but I just didn't know what it was. And they never told me that happened. So then what ended up happening actually was a lot of the students ended up really turning their backs on me, including very close friends of mine. And they told me to my face that it was my fault, because leadership actually ended up saying that it was my problem and I was provoking him and I had the spirit of lust on me, and that's why this leader was coming after me.
I think you said too, they actually with the students in this meeting, it was like kind of conveyed you have a Jezebel spirit, right? Like this is
They told me
this is your fault.
We kind of had,
Yeah.
I'll just say it real quick, we have been in this space a little bit, and it's just to see how much of a pattern it is that, like, it's like they have a playbook or something that's unsaid that they all use, and
it's pervasive in the church.
It's
a real problem. I want to add to just to clarify the meeting that you've just recently been told about that happened. So that was Stephen Alls that was brought into that meeting. And they had the students without you.
Yeah, I was purposely not invited and didn't know that this was happening. And so what I was told is that the entire student body was asked to come to this class, and I guess they brought in Stephen Alls and ended up praying for him and sending him off.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the guy who actually committed the essay, they brought in and had all the students bless him. And then leadership told the students that it was actually your fault. And that you
and they
were
never
the Jezebel spirit.
And they never asked if I was okay. They never asked my opinion of it. They essentially they didn't even ask me to come in and speak to them about what happened. They just had the messages that I had shown this third year, and they literally just took it from there, and they never came to me about any of it. Like, hey, Leah, like, what actually happened? Were you ever touched? Did these things happen? Did he say things to your face that perhaps aren't over text? They never did. They never, like, literally, they wanted to act like it had never happened and it was her fault and it hasn't happened to anybody ever before. Like, this is shocking. Of course it was her fault. So, and then they brought him in and prayed for him and released him.
I know that, you know, I guess she hasn't fully seen the Catherine interview yet, but basically the girl that Chris Reed Rick had a opportunity in the case with Catherine, who was harmed by Chris Reed. He had an opportunity to really look and see what had happened. He says, "Oh, he just found out new information now." That's why he brought up the Chris Reed
Her
thing.
story.
Yeah, her story. But like he had every opportunity to read the text to see that clearly, and his texts were, vulgar and clearly out of line as well. So basically this idea that like he I almost feel like he wants to keep himself clean of really looking at what's happening
Rick
or
Joyner.
really looking at the leadership. Yeah, he always wants to put a new person in. And like that's kind of why I think he was so mad with the Chris Reed thing, because Chris Reed was supposed to be the face of the ministry, for probably during the course of these lawsuits and stuff. Now, he's coming forward. He's disparaged the young men as though they simply just brought forth lies and meritless claims in the lawsuit. I've looked through it. Like it seems underscored to how, like, just from what I've known from Erica, like from over a decade ago, for him to just pretend like he doesn't know what's going on is just dishonest at best.
What I'm told by the third year that I brought those messages to, from what she told me, is that she brought them straight to Rick.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So
So he knew
that
about
means
this directly.
yeah, and then he's the one that let him go, and he's the one that came in, and he ended up, I think, he fired quite a few people that year. And he said he was cleaning house. I remember him saying it a couple of times, but that doesn't change the fact that he never actually wanted to have a conversation with the victims about it and hear their side of the story and what actually happened, and see if it actually needs to be brought to a separate justice system, to be honest, because there were girls even in our class that were 17 years old. My little sister was 16 and she was going to the classes a lot, and she was planning on starting the next year, and she would have been 17 in her first year. So I was extra, I think, protective for that reason as well. And because I knew that he was not just doing it to me, because I think I would have, you know, I would have spoken to him about it and been more, direct and been like, I don't know why you think that this is appropriate, but it's not. Because then he would have for sure threatened to kick me out of school, but at least I would have probably been more blunt about it, except for the fact that I knew he was doing it to other girls. Okay, so it is a pattern. And then also I was living with some girls that were second years. And I had asked them about it. I was like, hey, did you ever experience you know, anything strange from him? And they all said yes. They all were like, yeah, we did. And we have friends that did too. And one of them was like, yeah, he grabbed my ESS. And another one was like, yeah, he would conveniently have his hand sitting on the chair when I would walk over and sit. And I was like, oh my God, that happened to me as well.
It makes me think of back when I was in middle school and like how irritated I would be to see these guys that would just slap a girl on like the kind of behavior of that, where it's just like testosterone bully, and even then just that behavior. But like for it to be for that kind of behavior, even some of the texts you were sharing a little bit, just like that kind of talk towards those who are coming as daughters of the Lord to learn to walk closer in the way of Christ, right? And it's a church. Like, this isn't like you know what I mean? You wouldn't expect this at a university like UNC Chapel Hill or something, but you certainly don't expect it at a university within a church, But I'm really grateful that you're coming forward and sharing and just like working through the awkwardness of the conversation to just draw it out, because there's so many. Like they're offended as in their persons are violated, and then they're outcast, many of them, as just bitter black sheep, bad not to be listened to, you know? And it's absurd to me. Like, I don't.
I think with the experience I had there, it was that it had happened to so many other girls in identical ways or very similar or even worse ways from him and from other pastors. And at that point, I was like, I'm sorry. Like, if it was me, then I feel like it wouldn't have happened to so many other girls who I know them. I know that they're not trying to get the attention from these guys. Like, I'm sorry, like, y'all were not that cool. Like, I don't know why you thought that, like, all these girls wanted you. It was kind of shocking coming from pastors and leadership and having them actually tell us to our face that we had the Jezebel spirit and we were, we had the spirit of lust on us, and that's why this was happening. So when we went to Denmark, actually one of the pastors, actually I was called into the office, and he actually said, it was Brad McClellan. He told me that I had the spirit of lust on me, and it was written on my forehead, and he needed to wipe it off because that was the reason why this had happened. And it was really, it was hard to hear, but I was like, okay, like, I'm going to trust you on this because I don't know why it happened. And I was very young. I was naive. I think even Brad was in his late 30s, early 40s. And I was like, well, he's very, he loves the Lord very much. I don't feel like he would lie to me about this. So, okay, cool. Like, pray for me. And trying to repent for things that were just not my fault. Now that I'm an adult, I can see that. But when I was young, it was like, oh my goodness, did I cause this to happen? And then also I had my, fellow students telling me that it was my fault that it had happened. And very blatantly, a good 20 plus people telling me that it was my fault that I essentially ruined the entire school year because I had gotten the fired because of my spirit of lust. And that was it was a hard place to be in for sure, but I felt like it was important that I had. So I never regretted it, but I definitely felt like, well, why in the world am I here? Like, I'm just being essentially bullied by even classmates, by leadership. And they do kind of make it feel like you are no longer trustworthy. And so then it was like any word or anything that I ever had to say after that was just completely void because they were like, oh, this is the girl that got, Stephen All's fired. So it's a very interesting place to be in, definitely.
Wow.
They're in the leadership position where, of course, young daughters and sons are going to be looking to you for guidance and for spiritual wisdom and insight. And so that's what makes it so damnable in my book, for lack of better words, that they do this kind of behavior.
So that was, I guess you said, Leah, that was the first time a leader just spoke to you directly about this, was on the Denmark trip. And it was Brad McClellan. Was anybody else in that meeting? Was it other leaders or just you and Brad?
I do feel like it was another guy named Jim something who was one of the leaders as well on that trip.
Concept of like putting the spirit of lust on somebody else. And did you say he like asked, or he put his hands on you, or like he wiped you, or
Brad McClellan.
Yeah,
He wiped my forehead. He said that the spirit of lust carves his name into the girl's forehead, and so everyone around can see it. And Brad is the one who was able to wipe that off.
So he prophetically wiped it off, I'm guessing.
He did, but he physically did
that,
as well.
actually?
Like, he physically was rubbing my forehead.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, hold on.
Sorry,
it says
I'm not
reconnecting.
laughing. I'm not laughing at that, but it's just like, wow, the level, for me, the audacity of that. Like, I know, like, obviously you're a grown woman, you have your own children and everything, but like, my little sister, she's a grown woman now, Like, if that's my little sister and that's happening, like, like we're gonna have words, you know what I mean? And I don't understand why these guys can't see like that. We're told in scripture to treat those younger in the faith as young sisters or as young brothers. Like, I don't know, do they not have any brothers and sisters? You know, and some of these men, they have children.
And they're
Like,
married.
I mean, I don't know if it may be too intense again, but it is the words of Jesus. Like, he never went to a woman and said, hey, you need to get the spirit of lust off your forehead. But he did go to men, many Pharisees and those that had, he called dead men's bones inside. He did go to them and he said, hey, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it. So like, or if your hand does, if your hand is reaching against the daughters or the sons,
It's causing you
then
to
it would
sin.
actually be better according to Jesus that you just saw it off, you know? And that's so intense. I think he was using hyperbole, but like, let's take the hyperbole at heart value. They're like, that's how serious he takes it when you're reaching at sons and daughters.
So just to clarify, after you took your concerns to the third year student and Rick addressed the whole class, the only time or the next time that a leader spoke to you about this directly was in Denmark, and you were blamed for it and told you had the spirit of lust and the spirit of Jezebel.
And the leader
Yeah.
had to wipe your forehead.
And he wiped your forehead.
I mean, I'm surprised he didn't pull out the magic wand and just like, I'm gonna wave it off of you. And it's just crazy.
Wow.
Oh, I remember he like wiped it off with his thumbs. I remember it was just such a strange little situation. I don't know. It was odd because it was after one of our like, I don't know, we had a meeting and worship session or something. And it was late at night. I remember being called in at like 9 p.m. or something. And I was alone in his office with him and Jim. And that's it. And I was like, this is awkward. Like, it was super creepy. I was terrified. And then I was in that office by myself and it was all dark and creepy. I was like, this is so weird. Now looking at it as an adult, I'm like, if that was my sister, I
Yeah.
would have lost it. If that would have been my kids, I would have lost it. And if my parents knew any of this, they would have lost it. And I'm like, how could, like, I mean, maybe my perspective is different than men's. I don't know. But like, I was kind of shocked. I was shocked that they would have thought that that was appropriate. I'd be like, meet us in the morning. We're going to have a meeting in the morning and we're going to, you know, in a restaurant in a corner or something. You know what I mean? Like, in a way that's not going to make
Public.
you feel you are being completely, you know, attacked in a way. And also, it was just creepy. I don't know. I didn't like it,
And
but
like, yeah, allow you to have a friend.
Yeah, I don't think there's a reason that a male pastor needs to have a female alone in his office. Actually, I don't think that there always should be
this was
some kind of
common for
accountability.
them. This was not the
Yeah.
first or last time. Like that was common for them. Very
Right.
common. So that was, yeah, that happened. It happened to a lot of us every year before us. I know of that happening. And what I didn't like was that you'd go into the office and be sitting there and talking with these leaders and all male usually, and then they'd have their back to the door. So essentially no one could get in, and that for a person who is very vulnerable, like a woman is vulnerable, a girl is vulnerable, and to have a grown man who's twice your size, twice your age, blocking the door with his own back, and you know you can't get out, like it's a scary feeling for a woman in any atmosphere, including a church. So that happened a lot. Stephen Alls would do that a lot, and um I it's just something that I think pastors really need to be aware of like, how are you speaking to these people? Do they feel safe?
I think that's why it's important that we are all having this public conversation about clergy abuse with all these scandals coming out, because a lot of people have problems with like speaking against when it's a pastor or something. But, you know, we're hearing this word used a lot now, clergy abuse, and that's the point, is that they are abusing their position of power. They're using that power dynamic that they're your leader, they're over you, and you need to be in subjection to them. And like you said, then you have the age dynamic difference as well. And so you think, well, I'm here, I'm this student, you're the leader, you're older than me, so I'm in the place of subjugation here.
And you have the anointing. You have the high
Mm-hmm.
calling.
Yeah.
I'm just an attack
Right.
of that.
Yeah. Like you're made to feel like you're coming against the man of God,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 100% what it felt like. The problem that I had was that they weren't actually willing to sit down with the, the victim and understand what happened and where they
Mm-hmm.
were coming from. They didn't even acknowledge the fact that I was actually really happily in a relationship. And I was like, why aren't you questioning any of this? Like, you're not using logic here. And that for me
Mm-hmm.
was really hard because I was like, okay, well, they're not using logic. Okay, well, but it kind of also taught me like, okay, these are leaders you can't trust. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew from then, I knew I couldn't trust him. And I knew I couldn't trust a couple of them that were hired around that same time. Because they all had very similar, as far as spirit of accusation, but also just believing that everyone had a spirit of lust. And you're like, yeah. One of the female leaders told me the same thing, and I was like, "Why is that? Like, why do you say that?" And she was like, "Because you're dressed inappropriately." And I said, "How about you look at the girl standing behind me and tell me how my outfit is more inappropriate than hers?" And she was wearing a significantly shorter skirt and a tank top. I was wearing a t-shirt and a skirt that came down nearly to my knees, and and she said, "It just looks different on you." And I was like, "Okay, thank you." I was like, "That's good." I said, "What you're saying is it looks better on me." Okay, thank you. So potentially going to make someone lust because I look good in what I'm wearing and she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. That's not okay. Because I was like, and I think at that point she was a third year that I was asking, I was like, so how is what she's wearing appropriate? So it was like they weren't using logic. They were definitely doing this like favoritism. They were putting people in these little like groups, and it was like, oh, these are the popular ones, these are the unpopular ones, these are the, there were so
Mm-hmm.
many different little cliques that everyone was in. But I remember that being like very much said, and she was like, it looks different on you. And I was like,
Wow. So Leah, after all that happened, you said that you received an email. Can you tell me some about that?
yeah, it was, to be honest, like it was before, I think before the winter break. Um, or maybe it was during the winter break, but it was in the winter time, I remember. But I received an email just kind of stating if you have received inappropriate behavior or um, essay from either Stephen Alls or Steve Thompson, please come to this meeting room on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. And the meeting room was our youth room, like it was the youth room. It was quite large, but they were able to like black out the big windows and stuff. So don't know why they chose that room, but I was terrified to go because once again, like at this point, I didn't actually know who else had experienced it at this point. And I remember looking at that email list and being like, that's a lot of girls. Like it was at least 90 something on that email list. And I was like, what in the world? And I just like was reading their names as well, because you could see it, obviously. The email was sent to them as well. So I was like, half these people I don't know at all. And then some were in the class above me. I think it was only two of us, or maybe, I don't know, a few of us from my class or our class. But, and then, yeah, so I received that email and I went to that meeting. Um, I, I almost decided not to go because I was terrified of once again being, accused, and that's just a gross feeling to have. And, but I was like, yeah, maybe it'll be good. Maybe it'll be more than just wiping something off my forehead. Maybe they'll actually apologize. Actually, that's what I was thinking at that point, was like, maybe they're going to apologize and maybe they're going to, who knows, maybe somebody else has experienced this. And, I remember walking in, I had my like little Tupperware in my hand because I had just had lunch, and I walked into that classroom and I was like, oh, like I remember grabbing the door handle. Like I remember it. And I walked in and there were so many girls there. And I was just completely shocked. And I was also like, justified in a way, but also just so saddened. I was like, I can't believe this has happened to this many girls, and so many girls I didn't know, like in classes, because I had been around, for a full year before I had even started. So I had known, the fourth years, the third years, and the second years, and then us. So I already knew them. And there were girls in classes I had never, ever seen before. And there were at least 30 something girls there. And I was shocked because that room it is quite large. And then thinking about, as I was trying to think in my brain, I'm like, how many girls were there? This is 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Like if you think about like 3 lines of 10 is 30. And I'm like, there were much more than that. Like from what I remember, there were more than that. And then they ended up splitting girls into like circles, putting girls in, groups, I guess, so that they could share things that had happened to them. And in my group, it was, a girl from my class, the one that I had mentioned before, and then also some girls in the second year class that I knew personally. And so I was like, oh, thank goodness, like I'm not the only one who has experienced this. Yeah. And we just had a big meeting, and the, leadership came in and started talking to us about it. It was very much like a preaching. Because it was just all about it. They even mentioned David. They mentioned David. They mentioned the spirit of lust. They mentioned the Jezebel spirit. And they essentially were accusing the entire group of women for having the same spirit. And it was just kind of shocking because I was like, how can you accuse all of us of the same thing? And I was like, and I know a few of these girls here who are incredibly like timid and like almost like my little sister Hannah. And I'm like, they're like pure as white snow. Like there's no way that these girls are trying to get this kind of attention. And so I was sickened by it, but also not surprised. And Brad McLennan was heading up that meeting. And then I think Jim was in there again. I cannot remember his last name. And a couple other, third years that were in there kind of probably because they had to. It was uncomfortable, very uncomfortable sitting there and hearing it all over again. And once again, he got us all in these little circles, and he went around and started praying for all of us and wiping all of our foreheads again. Went over the exact same
No,
thing he had done in office
no.
and wiped
So this
every
was,
single forehead.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm not that, like, who knows to the degree, like, some of these women went through, and, like, you know,
Oh,
even just in your
that.
case, the
They,
absurdity that
oof,
that's crazy.
yeah.
So the same guy thinks that it's okay
Mm-hmm.
to, and he does it, and in front of another leader that stood by, the gym guy. I guess he was the one that was standing that time with you as well.
Yes, but also we had what's her name? Maggie something was in there as well, and she was let go in our first year as well. She was actually let go, and then she was brought back for that meeting, which that didn't make any
A
sense to me.
woman. A woman stood by over it. That's wild. Do you know this leader?
I do, and nobody liked this leader unless
Oh,
you were in her favorite circle. So I'm not surprised that they would
She was
bring her
incredible.
in.
She was very
verbally.
abusive,
Okay,
Oh
very
yeah, she
verbally abusive.
was.
verbally.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't have my only encounters with her were like in SF because she was still in there the first bit of SF, and she definitely thought that she could just be like a drill sergeant and like yell and belittle and demean us like we're in the military. Like, yeah, I remember nobody liked her unless you were in her little favorites, her clique of elite students.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. So Brad, the same thing that he did with you in the private meeting in Denmark, wiping your forehead. He did
Mm-hmm.
this with all of the 35 plus girls in this meeting.
Yeah,
Wow.
So
all of it.
you were told, were they all told the same thing? Like they have the spirit of Jezebel and they have the spirit of
Mhm.
lust.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, it's made me good to share because I don't know, when you were, we've obviously talked, Leah, now, and you've shared this with me, but this was us reconnecting now, you know, after you've been in Italy. This is the first time I'm hearing this now since all this news has come out, and you and me have reconnected. And I have definitely felt like this sense of I felt this sense of sadness that we didn't know that that was going on, because as like we talked about earlier, that how they isolated you guys and kept you separate. And I was just like, I can't imagine being there and being in your shoes. Like, we're 19, we're trying to figure out what to do with our life, and being ostracized and made to feel like
Mhm.
you're the problem. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I wish that I knew that that was going on, because I can't fathom being in your shoes and then being separated from your friends. And then some of your
Yeah.
friends even turning on you because they're told that you're the problem by leadership. And so I want to say too on a recording, like, I'm so sorry that that happened, Leah.
Thank you, honey. I think, I mean, obviously knowing this as an adult now, I see, because even in that meeting, even Brad, that the meeting personally, he even said to me, I wasn't allowed to talk about it to anybody. Um, and I know now why, because I know that if I would have told you, I mean, there's certain people, if you tell, it will start an absolute revolt. And he said it again at that second meeting with all the girls, and Rick ended up coming in at the end of it as well, and he spoke to us all about it. And um yeah, that was crazy. I was shocked. And he also said, you know, y'all are not to talk about it. And yeah, I was threatened multiple times that I would be kicked out if I talked about it. So
Wow.
I didn't feel like I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I couldn't talk to my best friends about it. So because I knew that if it got around, they would know. And also I was like, do they read minds? Like, how spiritual are they? You know, like, I'll
Yeah.
know if I say something. Um, so yeah.
It's
I mean, they'd
crazy.
always
That's how
walk
they get
you.
away with wiping women's foreheads.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they think, I don't know. Yeah,
I love that that bothers you so much, because there were
it
so many
really
worse.
does. Like, I imagine my little sister at a meeting after she's been harmed and violated in some way, her person, and this guy, this guru, telling that we're gonna wipe the spirit of lust off of you, and you putting your hands, you guys, well, as we'll get into, you
Sorry,
know,
y'all.
I'm sorry. I know it is. I think it's gonna help others too that realize, like, it's not okay to cover up. It's not okay to cover up. You're gonna make me cry.
Sorry.
It's
But
not
that's
okay.
exactly it. And for me, I'm done with the whole narrative of you're a better woman and you're more respected if you're silent. Um, that's
That's
just
the
not the way.
lie.
Yeah, that's not the way I play my life ever. So leaders are never silent, you know. So um, I will stand up for righteousness, and I know what is righteous and what is not. And I've lived long enough now that I can very clearly see that. But when you're a child, it's a whole nother story. And I would consider an 18, 19-year-old a child, because that's the way I see them now. But
Mm-hmm.
he also, okay, so I didn't even share this with you, because I'm like, if the wiping of the forehead is so hard, about lust, he did it with rape as well. So he also asked me if I
Whoa.
had, and he said the spirit of rape actually will like mark your forehead. And
Oh
so
my
he did that
gosh.
as well. So
Wow.
including me, a few other friends of mine. So it was like that was something he really truly believed was a thing. And I don't know where he was getting that. He believes he was getting it from God, but wiping someone's forehead, saying that every time you are RAPED, that the spirit is actually marking your forehead and making it so that others can see that that's happened, and so it's making it that you're more vulnerable and you will actually it will happen again. So he was saying if he wipes it off, then it's less likely that it will happen again. Like, this is what was said to me and to other girls. And I mean, I don't know. At this point, how much logic are they actually using? So I was like, okay, maybe this is right. I don't know. But still, that was too. So it wasn't just, RAPE and lust. It was, I'm sure, a lot of other things. I could probably see that is how he handled a lot of just spiritual issues with people, even men, perhaps. I'm not sure. It's possible he did the same thing with guys. I don't know, but I know that for us, he did it to all of us.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we know how he treated the boys, how he's treated them, at least Rick Joyner, how he's written off them and their that happened, or their essay that happened.
Yeah, I don't accept his coming in after and just signing off a signature with a man that you've just commissioned to do this kind of foolery over women who have been through all sorts of traumatic backgrounds and history with this, and for you to call them forward and then to basically mark them all with your scapegoating, like, it's unconscionable. It's not befitting of even a lowly shepherd, but to be like somebody that's set over top of all these women, to me, if that doesn't speak to the level of, I would say, negligence in Rick Joyner's leadership, at the very least, if you can't keep, enough watch over these ones that you're setting as shepherds over people's lives to speak into these sorts of things, like, that's just, it's not befitting of somebody to be an overseer and doing these sorts of things.
I was thinking it may be helpful too. I just want to share some background for.
Go ahead, you can keep doing that. I'm just checking on the voice.
Okay, that's fine. Some background just for others who won't know this, but they're hearing your story. But you and I were really good friends in school. We went down there. We were friends before from our hometown, and we had another friend. We were all very close. We were looking at apartments together, before we moved down. And, towards the end of the year after this happened, I think that, I don't know, it's not like we ever had like a falling out or anything, but I just remember feeling like Leah's just, not as close. She doesn't hang around us anymore, and we kind of drifted apart, and I never knew why that was. So I think that's why it's like affecting me so much now to know that that was them, the leaders that we were supposed to trust. They caused that separation and like caused you to leave the school with that shame on you and you to be separated from your friends. So it's like, I mean, I understand now why you didn't feel like you could talk to us. You're like, you were just threatened. You and all these other girls were threatened, like, that you can't talk about this and you're made to stay quiet and that you're just supposed to cover this up, So I don't know. I guess it's just like seeing the other pieces of the puzzle now, 15 years later, that I never knew, like kind of seeing the other side of things,
yeah, definitely. As an adult, I mean, seeing it from a parent's perspective and just as someone who's been through quite a bit in their life in general, you can kind of reassess what actually happened in a different way and using logic and using, your spiritual understanding as well,
Yeah.
from your experience with the Lord. Because you can bring those up and you're like on what planet is this okay? No,
Yeah.
it's kind of, that's, yeah. And this, I shared, the first time I shared was like that. It was like, I was completely shocked at what wasn't known from everyone's perspective because I assumed people knew and they were being, mean or were being, I don't know, I just thought it was better not to talk about it. Kind of the way that they kind of made us feel like we weren't allowed to talk about it. And so I thought, people in other classes knew. And I assumed people did talk, at least when they left school. Thing is, I flew away to Italy. So I wasn't surrounded by everybody, but I'm sure if you and I stayed close, I'd be like, did you know that this happened?
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have, but, and I assumed people did, but then on, speaking with some of these people we've been speaking with recently, I was just blown away at the fact that they knew nothing. And I was like, I said it on one of our like group chats, and I was like, do you not know why these people were fired? Like, are you serious? Like, there were so many girls that were affected by it that I was like, how in the world was every single one of those girls silent? Like, I was shocked. I was shocked because it's not my nature to be silent when I am abused, or, when I see a misjustice happening to someone else. If that happened to my sister, I would lose it. And I told my parents bits of it, and I didn't tell them everything because I didn't want them to worry when I was there. But, I told them things that had happened, and they were like, good for you. Like, saying something. But I knew I could trust my parents, but, yeah, it was interesting. It was heavy. It was really difficult, but thankfully I'm, older now, and we're all kind of going through what we experienced there and kind of assessing what was just blatant abuse and what was them actually being unbelievably immature in the spirit and being let into leadership by a pastor who honestly should have just known better. Because it just kept happening. And that's my issue with it, is that why is it continuing? Are you kidding me? It's been 15 years. And I'm like, and this was very, very blatantly wrong. I don't even know if, his own wife knows. I know that there was an issue with also Steve Thompson. And so I'm like, how is there so much silence around this? Like, how dare you be silent? Like, that's how I feel. Like, I'm very much like, I will lead the freaking army. This is not going to be tolerated because now children are being hurt. Like, no,
Right.
I'm sorry. No, I'll come back. I'll fly back from Italy and literally start something, because I'm like, this is not going to be tolerated anymore. Because we're all parents now. My son is almost the same age as this boy that was just taken advantage of. And I'm like, oh,
I just wanted to touch on, so you said Rick Joyner was at that meeting.
yeah, he was. He came in at the end.
So he saw clearly how many girls were there. And I think you said he, I guess, just mentioned both of these leaders, because you said these girls weren't just here just because of Stephen Alls. It was also, what did Rick Joyner say when he came in?
This is the first time I had known about this. So he had been let go in our first year. We all knew he was let go. We didn't know why. No one was really talking about why. Not clearly. People would say, oh, I think because of this, or I was told because of this. But then he was in that email, and it was clearly stated. That's another thing. Like, I was shocked, because that was like, oh, okay. So it was two of them. And then walking in and being like, so, because then we got broken up into these small groups, and then it was like, okay, so who was bothering you? And so it was kind of like a question of who abused you. And then Rick came in at the very end of it, after we had like a worship session situation. Ugh. And
So they did worship there? They had a worship
they
team?
ended up bringing in a worship team when the wiping of the foreheads happened. Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, I wonder if these worship kids know what they're doing. Like, I wonder if they know what just went on.
This is
Doubtful.
crazy. Yeah, exactly. They use it as like a front.
The level of
Of it, 'cause they
manipulation
read that.
that.
Wow.
So, okay, so you guys had that while they wiped the spirit of lust and the spirit of Jezebel off your foreheads. And then
Yeah.
Rick comes in at the end. So do you, like, what all did Rick talk to you guys?
But yeah, he came in and he was just like, hey, I know that you've all been brought in here because you've all experienced, abuse from Steve Thompson or Stephen Alls. And he's like, and that Steve Thompson was let go a couple months ago for the same reason, is what he said. And then, and he said, and we've had to let Stephen Alls go as well. So it was interesting, because it was like, dun, dun, dun. Like, he shared something that I don't think a lot of us girls even knew. So it was kind of interesting. So I felt like he was maybe not even aware of what had gone on before that, because they never mentioned it before. Brad never mentioned it, that it was ever, Steve Thompson. He was stating the fact that we were all dealing with the same familiar spirit. And, but he never even said Stephen All's in that meeting, but then Rick comes in and he's like very blunt about it. And so I was like, so this is a thing. But after talking with these girls, after everything had been released, the thing is that at that point you're like, okay, I'm not allowed to talk about it with anybody, but all these girls know. So like, I can actually talk to these girls about it. So then there were girls that were like, yeah, like this had happened. Oh yeah, we know that this had happened. And I was just shocked by the stories. I couldn't believe it, because there were so many cases that were so much worse than mine. And I was like, if mine was enough to get him fired, which was kind of shocking, because I'm like, did no one else come up about this? Because there were girls that were like, had experienced much more than I had. And yeah, so I was just shocked. And also them saying that this had also happened with Steve Thompson before. And I was very shocked. Yeah. 'Cause I didn't know Steve Thompson very well. I knew that he was like,
I'll add some, because since that happened, we were in the same class when Steve Thompson was let go. I think it was like over our Christmas break. We got an email from Rick Joyner. But the only thing they would ever tell us about that was like he had a Leviathan spirit, whatever that's supposed to mean. It was very kind of secretive and swept under the rug. And then it was just like he had the Leviathan spirit. And so we had to get rid of him. So we certainly weren't talked to about that or about any potential, essay or anything like that. And then I also wanted to, the room that Leah's talking about, it was the youth room, but it was also the room that we had our chapel in before school every morning. So I just wanted to give some so people know we're not talking about like this tiny little office that just, a few people are in. Like our class had, I think 120 people in when we started. And so it's a big room, so for there to be that many people there, and you said it wasn't even as many as what were on the email. So not all the girls responded to the email, but for the room to be like so full, I just wanted to put that in perspective for people that like, this is a big room that fits, it fits a good amount of people.
Yeah, we're being real conservative with over 30 because, and like you mentioned, some of these women didn't even get that email. They didn't.
That we're
a lot of
harmed.
So.
mates didn't get it, and my roommates had experienced it, because I asked them why they weren't there, and they were like, I never got an email. And I was like, what? And then our other friend, she didn't get the email, and she had experienced something similar as me. And I'm like, what?
So Leah, in that meeting, with all of those girls there, and with Rick Joyner coming in at the end, did any of the leadership like apologize to you guys for what happened to you?
No, not that I remember. No, they never publicly apologized. They said that it was the Jezebel spirit and that it was the spirit of lust. But they never said, I'm sorry, this should never have happened to you. That just seems like that would have been common sense to do, but it wasn't.
That's how they taught, I think, even good intentioned people there. This is the problem of the culture of cover up that is pervasive in church beyond Morningstar, is because like even good intentioned people and people we would say like are sincere Christians, they're taught that you shouldn't be speaking about this. You shouldn't process it. You should just, just accept it and move on. Or in you guys' case, you're taught that it was your fault. I mean, it's hard for me now as an adult and as a mother to imagine leaders being okay with that, telling a group of girls who were like experienced essay in church, as young adult women just trying to learn about God, having that kind of abuse put on them and then told it's actually your fault. And now actually you shouldn't talk about it. And if you do talk about it, you're going to be in trouble and be threatened. It's just hard for me to see, how did leaders think that that was okay? Because it's not okay. And that's why I think we need to talk about it. These kind of pervasive leadership practices in church, it has to stop.
Mm-hmm. But I've noticed, though, the people who are, as I've reached out to a couple of the girls, and I can tell that the ones that, there's a lot of girls that I can tell haven't processed it. There's a lot of girls that the way that they do process is actually just to forget it happened and act like it never happened. And it's better to never talk about it. And, and most of them are not the type to want to speak out about it. And that makes me really sad. But perhaps there's girls that were there. There were so many of them that I'm sure that there's girls that would love to say something about it. And then also just, I remember one of the third years that we both know had said also that she knew that the meeting had gone on, but she was actually told that she shouldn't go. So that she was asking if she could help any of the girls, like, hey, can I be there for them? Can I, and they said no, kind of back away from the situation. And that's just sad, because that's kind of the way that all leadership kind of handled all of us. And that was super isolating as well, because then you feel like there's actually something wrong with us. And then we're not going to be trusted for our entire rest of our time at MSU, because they label you. They label you as, whatever it was, a lustful person or a Jezebel. And that wasn't the last time I was told that either, by these specific leaders. And
just recently, you mentioned another time that you were given an ultimatum by leadership. Can you tell us about that?
yeah, this was also during my first year, but I actually, you and I were both in Winston-Salem, and we were at the church there before coming down to the Fort Mill branch, I guess. But I had been dating a guy who would have been considered a third year when I was a first year. And so I was dating him all the way through, until I guess the end of the first year. I was trying to break up with this guy. This guy ended up becoming the youth pastor. And he was, I think there were two guys that were doing it, but he was one of them. And he was often sharing with me his struggles with looking at things on the computer that he shouldn't be looking at. He had a real problem, to the point where he was always telling me, because he wanted to be very transparent about his struggles. His family knew. His family talked to me about it. I talked to them about it. I'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, this is a lot. But it was an addiction to the extent that he would leave and have to go home, and then he would come back. And it would happen typically once or twice a day. And then, but from his things he had told me is that it would happen up to 5 times a day. So, for me, that's an addiction, and that's a problem. From my perspective, I was 19, but I was like, I'm trying to marry this guy, and this is what's happening. This doesn't seem right. And it also doesn't seem right that he's in such a high leadership position, especially surrounded by youth, and he's dealing with these issues. Because I was like, this is lust. Like, this is like, whoa. And so, yeah, so I was trying to kind of navigate that, but I kept trying to break up with him, because also he was just a very immature guy, and I didn't want to be with him anymore. And because he was doing it in front of me, he'd always be checking out girls in front of me, and then he would do tons of things behind my back and then come and confess it. So I was like, this is just not healthy. Like, this is just like textbook not healthy. And so I tried to break up with him. I was living at the church at the time, so for me, so much of my life was in the church. And so I would try to break up with him, and he would like start having a meltdown and having like a panic attack in front of people. And he would make sure like it was a scene, and I wanted to make sure there wasn't a scene. So I tried to break up with him a couple of times, and then at a certain point, a leader came up to me and was like, "Hey, we need to have a meeting." And he was like, "Well, I think that you guys need to have relationship counseling." So then we went to like a relationship counseling session, which was ridiculous. Because I was like, it's one thing if I really want to be with him, but it's another if you don't. And that first session, he was in that, and he, was saying, I'm dealing with this, and this is what's happening, essentially, sharing that with this leader. And then between that time, and then I tried to break up with him again, and then it wasn't working because this was his first relationship I think he had ever been in. And so he was like, we're not broken up until I say we're broken up, essentially. And the thing is that he was in a leadership position. So in this church, if leadership felt like I had been, I don't know, lying about the fact that we were broken up or something like that, like they would kick me out of school. Like that's just the way that they were. So, or at least they would like severely reprimand me and make me feel like garbage. And I'm like, I'm trying to break up with this guy. What are you talking about? So I tried to break up with him again. And then the leadership pulled me into his office again, him and another leader, who were like pretty, well known in the church. And, they had me in their office alone and at night again after one of the worship sessions we had, and said, well, we've been told that you're trying to break up with him again. Like, what's going on? We really think, like, we're really hearing from God that this is supposed to happen. He knows it's from God that you guys are supposed to be together. He's planning on, asking you to marry him. And then I said, do you actually understand to the extent that he's dealing with these problems on, on the computer, on his phone, whatever, with looking at these videos? And they were like, yeah, we know. And I said, so why do you think that I would want to marry him? Like, why do you think that that would be okay? And they said, well, we really think that marriage is going to help this. We think that if you guys get married, they said, we think that you guys need to get married this year. And I just kept saying, like, I just don't feel like that's the right thing to do. And they said, well, I remember, he like leaned down, and this is a massive guy. This is Jason Hooper and Bobby Hussey. And Jason Hooper bends down and he says, let me put it this way. If you don't marry him, we're going to fire him. And if we fire him, it's going to be your fault. And I was like, okay, interesting. So I remember leaving that meeting being very, very torn and like not knowing what to do. Because I remember, and he was so happy to be the youth pastor, and I didn't want to hurt him. I just didn't want to be with him. So I was like, how are you supposed to like navigate this? And it happened one more time, but it was after one of our like Friday night worship, session things that we would do. And then this other Brad McLennan also, he pulled me to the side and he's like, so I heard you're trying to break up with him. What's going on? And I was like, do you know what he's dealing with? Because it's not good. Like, it's not okay at all. And I don't know why you guys were. And I even told him, because at this point I was very blunt about it. Because I was like, you're talking to me about lust, and he's doing this, and what are you saying to him? So I was very like, I talked to him like he was not older than me, because I did not respect him that way, because I was like, no, this is wrong. Like, this is blatantly wrong, and everyone will believe that it's wrong. But I was like, how can you think that this is okay for a youth pastor to be struggling to this extent, to an extent that it's actually changing his day-to-day routines? And then not just that, but he's actually admitting to me that he's actually lusting after children and youth, and will actually tell me that he positions himself during worship so that he could stare at these two specific girls who at the time were 13 and 15 years old. And I was like, wow. For me, that is wrong. And I said, do you know that this is going on? And he said, yes, we know what's going on, and we're trying to deal with it. He said, we think that you guys need to get married. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. And I just like walked away. And then I talked to my parents about it because I explained to them, they knew all of this, except they didn't know why I needed them to be around when I finally broke up with him in a public way that everyone would know we're broken up, because he just kept saying, no, we're not broken up. No, we're not broken up. And I'm like, but we are, because I don't want to be with you anymore. So my mom suggested him coming on our family. It was like a family reunion trip driving down to Texas. And I broke up with him in the car with my family in the car, so that it was like, okay, everyone knows now, it's done. And my parents in a second would have driven down there. I mean, leadership probably wouldn't have wanted to hear it, but yeah, my parents were like, absolutely, we'll come in and say, yeah, y'all are broken up. Like, it's obvious. Everyone knows it. I took my status off Facebook. Everything was done. And he had a couple of days with my family to really understand that it was done. So, and then leadership couldn't say anything when I got back. They couldn't say anything really, but no one else in the church knew why we broke up. So then there was a lot of talk about why we broke up. But I just remember, like, there was so much conversation about what actually happened. And I was like, once again, I can't say a word. Leadership admitted they knew about it, and didn't do anything about it. They suggested the best thing to do was to have him marry me, and I was not having it, because I knew that it wasn't about to stop. Like, I'm self-aware enough to know that an addiction doesn't just stop just because you get married. Like, that's crazy. So yeah, that was something that happened. I was told that I needed to marry him. Otherwise they would fire him, and they didn't fire him. So I played chicken with that situation, and I won, because they didn't fire him and he stayed on. And yeah, that was pretty intense.
There is so much wrong with that whole situation, Leah. I mean, it's so weird that the leadership felt the need to get involved in, like, your relationship like that. That's just so odd to me, that when you're trying to break up with your boyfriend, they feel the need to intervene, and their response and answer to the youth pastor's severe pornography addiction, that their response to that is to pressure you to marry him, and that's just going to be the Band-Aid and fix it, and then even give you an ultimatum that they'll have to fire him if you don't. And
My
it's
fault.
actually, it's
He said
yeah,
that out of his mouth.
your fault. Wow.
Yeah.
This is definitely a problem, a pattern in Morningstar for sure.
I was gonna say, just a quick blip. I remember from the IHOP thing, there was a similar pattern in their leadership culture there, where the leaders felt the need or the even entitlement to speak into others' relationship status and who's marrying who or who shouldn't marry who. Like, yeah, like that's not. I mean, no.
And it's my understanding that this issue that wasn't dealt with, that leadership knew about, continued on, because I know that this youth pastor was actually caught by one of the kids in his youth group, looking at this stuff in his office. I mean, I can't even imagine, like, as a parent, like, if that was one of my kids, I would be livid. So just the fact that they knew about this, not only that he had this severe of an addiction, but then he's actually thinking it's, transitioning onto girls he's supposed to be leading and teaching about God. And he's now, like, lusting after them. The fact that they knew about that and kept him in that position of being the youth pastor, they did that.
To the point that ultimately a youth, somebody couldn't be much older than my own children could walk in on such a thing in a place where they're supposed to feel protected, by the Lord and his people. Like, reprehensible feels like too light of a word, having children.
And I think this is just one more situation that could have been prevented had leadership actually taken action about something they knew about it, instead of what we keep talking about. This is the problem with the culture of cover-up, is that these issues can keep persisting.
From what I know of is that they didn't actually let him go. They didn't let him go, obviously, when I had broken up with him, like they had said that they would. And then after that incident happened, like I had heard about it all the way in Italy. And I wonder if parents knew. That's my whole thing, is like,
Right.
did the parents know?
Mm-hmm.
You tell the parents. Did you make that youth kid feel like somehow that was his fault?
We see this pattern of this toxic way of that they deal with sin issues in the church.
And it brings harm, you know, it violates other people's persons, their souls even,
Mm-hmm.
you know, these are souls that are, if this is a house of God where you're entrusted to God's people, then these are souls in your care. That's why scripture says if you're going to be a teacher in his house, that you're going to be held to a higher standard,
And a
because
higher judgment.
he cares about his children.
Mm-hmm.
There is like a lot of exposure right now that's been happening. Even that other big church that wasn't as familiar with the gateway thing,
Mm-hmm.
but like I think a lot of people, leaders, some anyways, are making it out that like this is just a bunch of gossipers who are bitter. And what would your response be to people who might say like you're just gossiping or bitter, or even like Rick Joyner recently has stated that basically blurred everybody together that was coming forward like a mass of flies. He
We're
compared
calling
it
us
to the
wolves.
Civil War battlefield. And now like after hearing about all the women that came forward, it's making more sense to me now that like, okay, well, like, you know, if you didn't deal with the past abuse and trauma to the point that it's still resurfacing today, now even in these young boys, now men coming forward, like, then yeah, we are going to speak up, because it would be wrong not to. Like biblically, it would
That's
be
how,
wrong not to, you know?
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly where I am. It's like I feel like I would be doing a disservice to these boys to not say
Yeah.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if my words will help one other girl who I don't even know that this happened to, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm not the only one." The way that I felt whenever I walked into that room and saw how many girls this had affected, I think that's that feeling that I wish I could help all of them. I wish that I could, make them feel safe and make them feel seen and make you feel, you know, that there is justice for you as well. And even if we're the only ones that know about this, and I'll tell you that it was wrong, I'll apologize to you because it should never have happened to you either, you know. But having
Mm-hmm.
someone say that to you is healing. And this
Mm-hmm.
is the whole, like, we were never given that. Um, I don't know if other girls were or not, but I don't think they were. I sure as heck wasn't. So I think it's important to speak up about it. It just is, because it's wrong for this to happen. It's wrong for it to happen to an adult. It's
Mm-hmm.
even more wrong for it to happen to a child, because the children are being brought there by their parents, and their parents don't know any better, and the children have no control over that. So
Mhm.
for me, it will not continue with children. I'm sorry.
I would just say that, like, for especially because it is so many women, and maybe there's a few out there that might see this. And I mean, you yourself, Leah, I remember meeting you, and like to know that like this is the way that you guys were being handled is crazy to me. So I would just say too, like, I'm not a church leader, but I am sorry for what happened to you and for what happened to some of your friends. One I know personally, and it's not a reflection of the Lord's heart at all. And that I think that He does see you guys, and that's why. I mean, He said He considered the sparrow, you know, that falls, the little sparrow. That verse, like, it hits me because it's like He really like drives home, like, and yeah, I know the hairs of your head, and like He cares for us like on the most basic things. How much more like our actual persons and souls that are violated in these kind of situations. And you know, just like you're really encouraging to me. This has been a ministry to me because I have a lot of past abuse and trauma in my own family, like with my mom and things that happen to them that people don't speak up, and it causes more trauma. It's a cycle, and to break that cycle, you have to expose it and you have to speak to it with truth. And it's what God asks of us to do. I would encourage anybody too that would want to share. It's hard. I see why women would want to just forget and move on, and it matters. I think the coming forward for others. Like that's important to me. I think of like my sons as they grow up. If they went through something, I would want anybody and everybody that could come to their aid, and with what they know, whatever piece of the puzzle that is, to do so, you know, especially when they're being disparaged as though they're bringing forth just lies and frivolous.
The way Rick's treated this.
It's, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I want to say here, Leah, thank you so much for coming and talking with us and sharing your story and what happened to you. I know it takes a lot of courage to come forward and share something that you went through that you were told to be quiet about for so long. So I just want to thank you for doing that. And just like he said, just publicly acknowledge what you should have gotten from leadership a long time ago, that we're so sorry that that happened to you and it happened to any other girls who may be watching this, and that should have never happened to you. That's not how leadership should be. And I also just wanted to say that if there is anybody who's watching right now who has been harmed and you feel like you've maybe relate to Leah, that you kind of have carried this burden yourself and just thought it was just you, but you'd like to maybe talk to somebody about it, even if you don't want to share publicly in a video like Leah's doing right now, but you just want to share with somebody else that, hey, this happened to me. I went through this. If you were harmed at Morningstar, or, you know, honestly, another church, we've got some contact information in the description. So please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to Leah or myself, or we have another girl who was a part of Morningstar as well, who's available for anyone who wants to come and just tell their story that this happened to them. So yeah, thank you again, Leah, so much, and it's meant a lot to me just reconnecting with you and being able to kind of process through this stuff. So thank you.
Yeah. I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Yes, we love you too. Thank you guys for watching and for taking the time to hear Leah share her story today. Please do stand with us in calling for accountability. There is now a public petition started by former students calling for a third-party independent investigation to take place into Morningstar Ministries and its history of past abuse, harassment, and cover-up. Enough is enough. You can find the link to the petition on change.org in the description below. I know my husband, for those of you who follow along on the channel, does not usually ask for people to like and share his videos and all that normal YouTube stuff. But I would like to encourage you guys today to like this video and to share it, because I believe Leah's story deserves to be heard. She's one of my friends and we were students together, and she deserved better than this from leadership in the church, as did all the other girls that were in that meeting with Leah, as well as the boys who were harmed in the YSF program, and even those that never got an email but who were harmed during their time at Morningstar. I'm honestly tired of leaders covering up their sin in God's house. So yes, I do encourage you to like and share the video and sign the petition.
With you, there's something about someone who's been through the flame. I can see it, 'cause it's written on your